Now we're going to get to our keynote panel of the morning called Go Forth, or Community is Easy, Change is Hard. Our panel members are Brianna Marshall, Annie Foe, and Micah Vandegrift, who is here virtually. And all of them are alumni of the blog Hack Library School. For those who aren't familiar with it, the blog is collaboratively written by library school students, and the purpose is to try to engage each other and their readers on topics in LIS education and in the field generally. So for years, they've been asking the readers, what will the information professions be next year if we define them for ourselves today? If we had a voice in the development of curriculum, what would that degree entail? And how would you hack library school? So each of our panelists has had a key role in the evolution of the blog and are now doing really cool things in the field. Brianna was a Hack Library School writer and editor from her first year of library school until graduating with her Master of Library Science and Master of Information Science from the Indiana University School of Informatics and Computing in 2014. And currently she is the Digital Curation Coordinator at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Annie graduated with her MLS from Indiana University, Indianapolis in 2012, where she started writing and then eventually became an editor for the Hack Library School blog. Currently, she is the undergraduate experience librarian at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And Micah graduated with his MLIS from Florida State University's School of Library and Information Studies in April 2011. Micah instigated the Hack Library School movement with a call to action on In the Library with a Lead Pipe and a Google Doc for sharing resources with other students. He's currently working as the Digital Scholarship Coordinator at Florida State University. So now I'll turn it over to them.
So I guess I should just go then? Okay. So, hi everyone. I'm so glad to be with you all and bummed that I couldn't be there in person. I'm going to turn my video off in just a second, but I just wanted to let you all see me and I can sort of see you. Actually, could someone spin the computer that I'm seeing so I could see the audience? Yeah, there we go. Oh, hey everyone. Good morning. Thanks for being here. So I'll turn my video off so it's not so choppy the whole time. We're really proud to be here and pleased to be part of this. I think this is a really important thing that you all are doing, and thanks especially to the planning committee and to Nicole especially, who we've worked with over the past 6 months or however long this thing has been. It's been really great, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what comes out of the conference. So the topic of our talk, Brianna and I, that we worked on together, this idea of Go Forth. This is something that I used to sign. It was like our rallying cry or something when we were emailing each other in Hack Library School behind the scenes. I would always end the email with Go Forth, and I like that because that one Levi's source was really cool, but also because I think it's kind of that imperative that we have to move forward into the profession, but also to push it forward at the same time, which is part of the reason that Hack Library School was a thing and continues to be a thing, and the reason I think that you all are just in that room today. So a big part of that was establishing that community, just being part of a group of people who are talking about ideas, thoughts, and we're trying to make things happen. But change is not easy to do. So I think I can advance my own slides here. Here we go. For this, I wanted to start with Camille. So Camille Thomas is awesome, and she is my graduate assistant currently at Florida State. Camille is an ALA Spectrum Scholar. She was an ARL CEP Fellow. She's the ALA Student Chapter President at FSU. She's an all-around awesome person, really bright, really brilliant. And I've loved having her as a grad assistant, except for the fact that I feel bad giving her grad assistant type work, because she's much more capable than that, but she'll be a great librarian. But I went to Camille and I said, hey, Camille, I'm going to do this thing. I was talking to people. I haven't been in library school in 4 or 5 years, so I don't even know what my, if the concerns that I had about why this thing was so relevant. So I asked her, what would she want to hear from a talk like this at a symposium like this? So what Camille said is she had three.
Hi, Micah. I'm sorry. I don't mean to jump in. Is there any way that you could turn your
like there's a
volume
lot to
up
be doing.
on your
How do you
computer?
balance all that out, and then especially how you engage in what you're doing, like if you're doing practical work experience and internship and leadership. How do you engage in that in everything else that you have to do, picking up in classes, having a social life, etc. Another thing that she asked that I thought was really important: how much of this are you actually supposed to absorb? How much of what you're doing in library school do you actually take in and it becomes part of what you do? And then her final question or point was that she thinks a lot of people sort of stumble into librarianship, which is exactly the path that I took into it, and that it's important if you get into it in that way to define a goal. What's the reason that you're there? It's not just because you love this book, but there's something that you have to do as part of being a librarian. So I wanted to introduce all those points that Camille said, because I think they're really important, and they come from a colleague of yours right now, from when he's in school, who's getting ready for the session. So I'll tell you, that thing where you're supposed to tell everyone up front what you're going to tell them. These are my points right here. So if you're going to write anything down, write these down and then stop writing and talk later. I think it's important to note that successes or failures won't define you, but your principles will. That I hope is how that I hope is why people keep asking me these kind of things. Is that they believe in the things that I believe in, and not that I've done well, although I hope I have, and I know absolutely that I've failed, but that I believe in about our profession, about what we do as a career, and that those principles carry me forward. The second thing, the best advice that I ever got in library school, I can't even remember who it was from. It was someone who, it might have been actually an email in Hack Library School. Someone said, you will get a job. You will get a job, you will get a job, you will get a job. Stop thinking about the job and start thinking about the work that you want to do when you're on the job. The very first day after you're hired, you're going to be expected to do something, and not just expected to perform, but expected to act in a way, to be a colleague to other people, to be a professional. That's the thing that you need to be thinking about. You will get a job. Don't worry about that. But you'll have the opportunity to make your career. Your career doesn't happen to you. You create that thing. So think about the work. Think about how you'll carry those principles into the work. Number three, I think we talk a lot about the problems of library school, but I think it might be that what we aren't talking about are the structures that are creating this problem. So we can tease this out in our conversation later, but I think LIS education is what it is because of the external forces on it. And I'll list some of those off right here. Some of these might sound familiar to some of you in the room. Promotion and tenure, funding, rapid change in technology, with no change in higher education, curriculum committee, funding, research interests of faculty members, funding, tenure and promotion, funding, departmental politics, funding, ALA accreditation, et cetera, et cetera. These are the things that create the space that we all come into so excitedly when we start a library school program. It's a really weird political engine based on committees and meetings and funding and research interests of faculty. So I don't think necessarily that the curriculum is the problem. Obviously, that needs to be updated and needs to stay up to date. It's obviously not our faculty members who are the problem. They care about us. They care about us getting the best out of our education. But all those external forces are the things that cause problems or create the problems that we're dealing with. And then finally, the point that I want to leave you all with is what if. This is kind of the idea. There were a couple of statements in that original Hack Library School article that I wrote that started with that. What if? What if we took this education and made it for ourselves? What if a bunch of librarians, working librarians, started a Black Mountain College-style LIS program that was taught directly out of our daily work experience? That's not something that exists right now. What if libraries, or in my personal work interest, what if libraries took over academic publishing and changed that whole system? All those what-if kind of questions are the ones that are most exciting to me in the field, in library school and in what I've gone on to do in my job. So I'd encourage and challenge you all to consider the what-if question. So let's talk about some of my failures. So my plan originally when I was in library school was to be, in school, in college, grad school, was to be a cultural historian, and I totally failed at that. I got the Master of Arts in American and Florida Studies at FSU. Really enjoyed my time in that program. Had applied to a bunch of PhD programs in cultural history and was turned down from every single one. So I had no backup plan, and I had to pivot really quickly. And the guy you're seeing on the right there is Dr. Wayne Wiggins. Some of you might know him. He's a dean of library history. He's a library historian, librarian, and a historian. So Dr. Wiggins was one of my professors, and I was really lucky to have him as a professor. And he said, what we need in librarianship is people who approach this work critically, like having a background of like cultural studies criticism. So I applied to library school not for any reason at all except for the fact that the deadline was late in the summer. So I found out in April, March that I was denied from all my PhD programs and applied to library school because the deadline was late and I needed something to do. Turns out it was exactly what I needed, and it was the perfect program for me. My first class was principles of web and media production, and it totally changed my view of what information could be, what information was, how I would interact with information through my field. So the guy on the left there that you're looking at is Dr. John Fenstermaker, who was the head of my American and Florida Studies program. So what I learned through that failure from graduate school to library school, in grad school, people are passionate about ideas, and I really took that on, and that became part of the purpose of what I do in my work. But in library school, I found that people were really passionate about action and advocacy and being part of something and participating in making ideas happen, and that has been much more influential on what I do in my work. So Dr. Fenstermaker taught me the craft of criticism, and Dr. Wiggins taught me the context of how that works in a world in an important way through information. So then I went on and started library school, as you all know, at Florida State. And this was a blog post I wrote that you can find on my blog if you wanted to see it. You can find it, I'm sure. But another failure here for me is that I totally failed people's expectations of a librarian, and I still continue to do that. And I'm very proud of that. That I am not a person who works in the library because of the books, although that is incredibly important, and there are people that will always go to library school because of that reason. But that's not me. I wrote this post, ever heard of librarian who doesn't read? I wrote that about 1 year into my program at Florida State. And there were two things that were happening to me simultaneously. One, I was inspired by the substance of librarianship, the passion and the principles of it. But I was also underwhelmed by the training in it. So the actual program that I was going through, the curriculum didn't seem to be meeting the expectation that I had, that I was inspired by. What I had picked up by this first year in library school was that libraries matter in a way that I never considered before. That a library is not just one thing, that I never had to consider the fact that a library is different than an archive, is different than a special collection. All those things are different, but we've always used that word library to cover them all. I also learned, and this is what I deal with more and more in my job now, that libraries are complicated, political, bureaucratic, social organisms stuck in the fabric of our culture, and that there's no way to distance from all of those things in the work we do, but embracing and engaging with it is really important. And finally, that technology is changing everything. So when I was in library school, all of the coursework, or a lot of the coursework that I was attracted to was almost entirely in digital media. Web, at that time, we were calling Web 2.0, which I'm sure no one talks about or says anymore. So I was there, and I was pretending to be a librarian without ever being interested in books or the function of the library. really interested in the technology. And what really captured me and what kept me in the program and kept me engaged was the potential that I saw that a library could do many things for many people. And it felt flexible, and it felt flexible enough for me to be able to work in, coming from the background that I had. And then the curriculum, of course, as I'm sure many of us have felt, that it wasn't challenging in the same way that my former academic program was challenging. And that I saw that as a problem. I saw that as something that needed to be fixed, that I had an opportunity and a responsibility to fix that. So this post that I had on my blog, you can see the date there from May of 2010, a long time ago. This kind of inspired a series of guest posts by other colleagues, other library school students who were blogging at the time that I started to get in touch with. And that is what actually led me into the idea for Hack Library School. I wanted to point out this picture on the right here. This was my experience of library school. The Florida State University program is entirely online, so I would have a bowl of rice and chicken or something in my class there on Blackboard Collaborate with the readings pulled up on the side. And this was my experience of library school and community. It didn't really feel like everything that I'd hoped to get out of it. So Hack Library School, the first impetus there was to create a community as an outlet or an opportunity to challenge myself in my curriculum and growing into the field, and to challenge my peers, people that I knew were having problems or dealing with the curriculum in a different way. Sorry, checking notes in the chat here. Yeah, there's still a bit of an echo. Sorry about that to our virtual people. Hack Lib School was never meant as a slight to my professors or to my school or to LIS education broadly, but it was meant as a chance for us all to get out of this what we need to get out of it to be great at our job, and that sense of growing the community around that. And that's exactly what we did. So it began as this article that I wrote in the Library with the Lead Pipe, which I would encourage you all to go back and read through. It's quick and easy. And it was a blank Google Doc. I set up a Google Doc. The post was published on my anniversary in 2010, so I wasn't even around. And I came back at the end of the day, and there were people there writing and talking and conversing and sharing ideas. And one of those ideas was to create a productive, active community. And that's where the idea of a blog came from, that we could continue the conversation and that it would grow and feed into a lot of different things. And both Annie and Brianna, I think, will talk about how they took that on. Our focus in Hack Library School was always to push boundaries and to challenge the norms of our educational program. One thing one post I always wanted to write that I haven't gotten back around to was to really think about and challenge and explore the ALA accreditation, right? This is this thing that validates all these library school programs, and as you go to get a job, you're supposed to have a degree from an ALA accredited university. Well, what does that mean? Why is that a thing? Do we have a say in what the ALA accreditation board considers good enough? Are we involved in the shaping of our own curriculum? That was something that always bothered me, is that I didn't know what ALA accreditation meant. And I still don't, but I think that that's something that we should be asking about. For the purpose of this symposium, something I wanted to remind you all of, it was this, I'm sure you all have heard Charlie's name. In 2008, and this is something I wrote into and was inspired by when I wrote that original article, the Charbot wrote this Library Student Bill of Rights. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to look it up right now and kind of keep it in the back of your mind as we continue the conversation today and as we go back to the program. I think this has been really overlooked, and that it should be revived as we think about our curriculum critically. I want to highlight 5 of the rights that she talks about on this Bill of Rights that I think are especially important. Do I need to read this? No, you also read that. So the rights that so this is what she wrote. In order to create a more vibrant and resilient profession, the students of Library and Information Studies programs should be entitled to the following rights. So these are 5 that I wanted to highlight. One, the right to challenge. This is me in a nutshell. She says, debate and critical inquiry between library students should be encouraged, while information activism should be considered alongside impartiality, et cetera, et cetera. Another right, the right to experience, that you should have access to formal apprenticing and mentorship programs in library school. This is something that we haven't necessarily done well, that could be done a lot better. The GA-ship program that we have at Florida State University is a part of that, and I think that it's a really good one. The right to explore, that there should be interdisciplinary coursework required as part of building a new skill set into the information profession that is absolutely necessary. The right to redefine, that libraries and librarians are changing as fast as their users, and that we need to be able to redefine ourselves, not to fit into a textbook curriculum or a textbook model of what a library person is, but to redefine ourselves as we're going through that and as we're creating that. And the final right I want to mention is the right to develop, that we should be able to test and modify and produce tools and technologies that we will use throughout our career, but we really need that practical, hands-on experience and development, not necessarily in a technological sense, but in the sense of being involved with what we do. So that's kind of big picture. I wanted to make sure to mention that Charles's Library Student Bill of Rights is something that you all should be considering. Another idea that I was incredibly inspired by that we wrote about on Hack Library School was this idea of Big Tent librarianship. So the quote that you're looking at right here is actually from Andy Woodworth, that was quoted by Britt Foster on the first post on our public launch of Hack Library School. And it was this idea of the Big Tent, that librarians, regardless of where we end up in this field, that we're all connected by the same principles. And I think I want to echo Andy and Britt and everyone else saying the principles are what matter, and that we can enact change by uniting around this principles of access, principles of the freedom of information, that anyone can and should have access to information that they need. And this is what Britt wrote in that post on February 14th when we launched the blog. That's what library school is. It brings people together people who have a belief in the power of information, and gives us the tools and ideas to do something concrete with that belief. How we choose to do it may look very different, but the passion for information is the thread that unites us all. This is another one of my failures, that I have totally failed at participating in the Big Tent. I did really well at it in library school because it was easy to do. It was easy to stay connected, to hear what the difference between an archivist and a special collections person and a public librarian and an academic librarian. That all existed in my world because I was creating that through the blog and through my conversations with people. But as soon as I got on the job, I totally failed at participating in Big Tent librarianship. My ALA membership, I was a member for 1 year, and then after a year I quit because I, air quotes, wasn't getting anything out of it. I found it incredibly difficult to stay connected with colleagues outside of even my own specific area of work. So in academic librarianship, there's a variety of roles like tech services and special collections and outreach and reference librarians, and it's been really complicated for me to be able to remember how to stay connected to those people, to reach across the stack to the public librarians in my same town, people who I go into that library and yet I haven't found a way to connect with them. So for me, it's been a constant reminder that as difficult as it becomes to stay connected and to produce change across libraries totally, it's important for me to remember that the principles are always the same. And that's the thing that when I walk into a public library, I can know that we have the same perspective on the principles of why we do the work that we do. So I'll pause there and hope to hear more in the discussion, but I wanted to turn it over to whoever's next. I believe Annie.
Okay, so and actually just up front, so we kind of broke this keynote up by having Micah start off, and I joined the blog pretty soon after Micah put out or wrote the article for Lead Pipe, and then Brianna's going to talk for a little bit. Yeah, so we're just kind of going to be talking about our stories and how we came to the blog and our experiences in library school and getting jobs and even beyond that. So just again, it was really funny last night. Brianna and I were looking through some of our old posts that we wrote, and I have to admit, like, I am slightly embarrassed a little bit, and I'll talk a little bit about why. So I started library school in, like, the fall of 2010. I am from California. I packed up everything in my tiny car with my 2 cats, and I drove to Indiana, where I had never been before, and I just jumped like feet first into library school. And I remember that first semester feeling really, really freaked out because everybody else in my program, so my program, it wasn't quite, it was like this weird like sister program of IU Bloomington, so a lot of the students in the class were already working full-time in libraries. They already spoke the language. They already had jobs in libraries. They were just trying to get the degree so that perhaps they could move up in their job. And here I was, a person with really not very much library experience at all, and I felt really, really isolated and really, really alone. Plus, I don't know if you guys have ever been to Indiana, but like, you know, the diversity was also really, for me, like, I don't know, jarring. So I did feel really alienated there. So I remember reading the original Lead Pipe article that Micah wrote, and yeah, seeing it as a call to action to really try and hack our own library school programs. I totally remember the Google Doc, and I saw all these people typing and like people making like anonymous like snide comments about, you know, people with LAS PhDs who've never worked in libraries teaching, you know, and other people like defending it, because there was someone who actually did want to pursue her PhD in library and information science. Anyway, it was awesome. I loved the energy, and I kind of just spied on the community for a while. So I remember reading Britt's post, and I just started like pestering Micah. So I think I sent him an email just asking if I could maybe write a guest post. And then we eventually started G-chatting, and he's like, you know what, yeah, like write this guest post, but why don't you actually just join the blog? Like we actually could use more people, and we, you know, he was actively also trying to diversify the ranks of the writers. So I like totally made my day, and I was really, really excited. And yeah, so I joined the blog and eventually became the managing editor of the blog along with my colleague, Rose Chow. But what I'm embarrassed about actually is the first post that I wrote. So it's funny that Micah makes a crack about like Web 2.0, because what does that even mean? Like, do you guys remember when people would say that? I do. Yeah, so my first post was actually about just putting yourself out there on the internet. Before I went to library school, I, you know, was just this kind of like slacker person that like worked at a coffee shop. I was really low tech. I didn't have a smartphone. I honestly didn't even know how to like Google things properly. Like if I could go back in time and look at like my Google searches compared to now, like I was seriously, I just did not understand the internet. And not that I went into librarianship for the books or anything like that, but I just also really lacked some of the skills that I think are essential if you want to work in libraries. Yeah, and I really didn't understand social media, and I did not understand how to leverage it. So for me, writing this post, it was sort of like the first step on the path to where I'm at now in my career. And I have to say that in library school, just doing something tiny like writing this really embarrassing post, please don't look this up and read it. You know, it like comes back to you in so many ways, like years later. So I still continue to be surprised just by just putting yourself out there just a little bit. Yeah, but looking at this, like I think I mentioned LinkedIn as like a social media tool. Why? No. I mean, I just didn't know what I know now, right? So hindsight is 2020. But the one thing that I did try to do with Hack Library School, so I mean, eventually, most master's programs are like what, 2 year, 1 to 3 years. It just depends on how fast or how slow you want to take your program, right? So generally, I feel like the blog kind of has a rotating cast of people who write and are managing editors, and that also includes leadership. That's just like the nature of library school, right? So after Micah graduated and he got a job, he obviously is not going to continue to be a managing editor of a library school blog. I took over with my colleague, and my vision for this was just to actually try to get the conversations happening beyond the blog and in person, and also like on a national level. So one thing that we did was we had a conversation starter accepted at ALA Annual in 2012 in Anaheim. And that was one of the first opportunities for this community of library school students and early career librarians to get together in the same room. I mean, one of the magical things about this blog was that, it was a great resource, right? So we have all of these different posts about different kinds of topics, like questioning different issues in the field, in our education, like addressing gaps in skills. But all of this is online, and in a way, you kind of self-curate your own bubble online, right? So, and I think we weren't necessarily able to capture all the other people who aren't necessarily on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook, or social media is not really for everybody. And I also feel like having these conversations in person also brings a different level of energy. So when we had our conversation starter, it was a pretty informal panel, even more informal than this. It was more of like a few of the hackers just asking the audience questions, which we will do later. And yeah, just having a really dynamic conversation. And as soon as the official part of the panel was over, like the entire room erupted in conversation. Like that to me is a successful conversation starter. Like you could just tell that like this is something that people have been wanting to talk about. And and since then I've continued to be like amazed by the work that the blog is doing. Like it's seriously like surpassed anything that I could ever imagine. So yeah, after I graduated and eventually I was able to find a job, so you can too, I passed the baton to Brianna and Topher, who did also really awesome things, that she'll tell you a little bit more about that in a bit here. Next slide. Yeah, so it's been so long since I feel like it's been so long since I've been in library school. So I graduated in like May 2012. It's been, oh my gosh, like almost 3 years now. I kind of forgot about a lot of the experiences that I had in library school, and how some of those experiences have impacted what I do now. Working with this community of like professionals and students, like it just helped me meet so many people in this profession, and I'm really, really proud to have been a part of this project. And I look at all the original writers and where they're at now in their careers, and they like continue to like blow my mind. These are all people that I look up to. But the funny thing is, especially after reading over some of my posts, so another thing is when you write stuff on the internet, it can just stay there. And I'm not ashamed. Like I was really, really naive. I had a lot of hope for the profession, and I had a lot of hope for like the ability to change like our education. And now as I like progress in my career and I look back, I'm like, oh, well, I guess there were things that I just didn't know that I didn't know. And in a way, I think I am much more critical of the profession now than I was in school, but I'm also a little bit more aware of what to be critical of. And I think partially some of the blog posts that I wrote was just me kind of coming up with stuff or trying to like think through things because I wasn't working as a professional in a library. So Like, for example, I, in school, did not see any connections to social justice and librarianship in school. That was not a part of my curriculum. I actually thought when I started library school that we would be like talking like theory. So I took an organization of information class, right? So I thought like, all right, cool, we're gonna talk like linguistics and like structuralism, and we're gonna talk about signs and symbols and how that makes meaning. And I like raised my hand and brought some of these things up, and the guy who taught it was, he was an adjunct professor who had his PhD in business. Like I'm just thinking like there's so much potential here. Like think about like all the cool philosophy that you could tie into, like how we understand words and meaning, and how does that translate to finding information. Nope, didn't get any of that, none of it. We wrote like about, I don't know, business models, or it was not inspiring to me at all. And those were things that I had learned prior to library school and things that I found interesting, but in my program I didn't really get any of that. It was very much skills based, kind of, but not even that well done. I don't know. I shouldn't like totally trash my program. It was fine. It's just what you had to do in a way. But I feel like that's why so many people are drawn to the blog. Is like you feel like you're just doing this thing. Like I just have to take these classes so that I can finish and like get out there and do a great job. But yeah, like the interest that I had before, I just didn't get any of that while I was in school. And this is maybe an unpopular opinion, but I actually think it's really important to have some kind of theoretical understanding of what you do in librarianship. It really, really bums me out to hear people complain that, oh man, I'm so tired of learning about theory. I just want to learn the skills that I need to get the job. You will learn those skills on the job, but you need to step back and actually have like a big picture idea of what you're doing, because otherwise, what makes you different from someone who just works in a library, right? I think, as Micah mentioned, this is a field that's full of like passion for advocacy and like activism. And yeah, we're all about taking action, but we also have guiding philosophies that like move us through that. I mean, not to say that you have to have that passion to be a librarian. Like it's totally fine too to just, if this is just a job for you, it's just a job. That's okay too. But we should have some sort of like principles behind what we do, right? Yeah. So one thing I do want to just keep kind of coming back to this is that I do want to stress that it is actually important to acknowledge your interests and passions that existed before you came to library school. So this is a graduate school. I mean, it's a grad program, right? So your training, your background, everything you did before then, it's not really for nothing. The like critical thinking skills that you learn, the ability to like time manage, I don't know, I feel like that's really important, especially in grad school, but the desire to quench your thirst for knowledge, all of that carries into library school and also into your future careers. So, everything that you do, it all ties together. When I was in library school, I was so preoccupied about like getting the skills that I needed for the job. I mean, I think back and I was so freaked out about not being able to get a job. I don't know about you guys, but for me, I was really motivated by like fear of failure. After I discovered blogs, because I actually really didn't know anything about blogs before library school. So thank you Hack Library School for teaching me about blogs. Yeah, I feel like this person probably still has a column, the Annoyed Librarian. Are they still around? Yeah, okay, so they wrote this blog post about something like get an MLS, like graduate with thousands of dollars with debt and no job prospects. And you know what I did? I read the comments. Why? Because I hate myself. Yes. I read the comments on that, and it seriously freaked me out. This is like my first semester, so I'm already feeling isolated. I'm feeling alone. I hadn't discovered there were other groups of students around the country who probably felt the same way. I was just like in my little student worker cubicle reading like the comments on Annoyed Librarian about all these horror stories of these students who were like saying that 5 years out, they haven't found any jobs, they're racking up debt, they're working at like McDonald's, like all of these horrible things. They just made me feel sick, and I just thought, oh no, I've given up so much to be here. Like, I can't let this happen to me. So when I was in school, I was like, what do I need to know? Like, I probably need to know like information literacy skills, right? And like XML, metadata, and cataloging. And like if you look at my transcripts, I was taking classes in like all kinds of things like that weren't cohesive necessarily. I was just like freaked out. I just wanted to make sure that I was like employable. And I actually, instead of taking 2 classes, I probably did 6 credits like worth of internships. So as much as I like complain about my school, I also feel like I didn't even I didn't like take all the classes. I used those credits instead to actually go and just do an internship and get experience. So I was very concerned. But I think looking back on that, I wish that I could have told myself to relax a little bit more, because it's not so much about the skills that you need for the job, right? It's to like think about like the bigger picture things. So yeah, another note I would say too is because I knew I wanted to work in academic libraries. And actually, out of curiosity, how many of you are thinking academic librarianship? A few of you? Okay. Yeah. I would just say that it doesn't hurt to just start thinking about your research interests while you're in library school. And even if you want to go into like public libraries, which I realize that the requirements in terms of like having to write about your work is not the same in public libraries versus academic libraries, but I do think that it's important to share the work that we do and share our ideas with each other, regardless of what type of library you're in. Anyway, I didn't think about that stuff when I was in school because I was too just freaked out about trying to learn all of these various skills. But yeah, I wish that I had thought a little bit more about what my actual research interests were and what really interests me, like in this field, versus trying to learn all of these different skills. Okay, and actually leads me to my next point. And next slide. Yeah, it's totally okay to not know everything in school. So, and maybe it was just, well, actually, it's not just me. I know a lot of people were really freaked out and just think that they have to know everything and like try to, I don't know, dabble in like tech services and like programming and teaching and I don't know, magic. But yeah, it's totally okay to not know everything because, to be honest, this is a profession that is wholeheartedly supportive of lifelong learning. Like, the biggest thing that you can graduate with is like curiosity and the drive to want to learn more. That's the most important thing because, there's so many things that happen like on the job that no school will ever prepare you for. And I think when I was in school, I thought that maybe I had to take a management class. None of the stuff I learned in that management class applies now. I actually manage people now. There's no connection there. I have no idea, why I was forced to take it, but, it's like, even if you take a class that's, is supposed to address some sort of skill, it doesn't always translate to what your work environment is going to be like. Yeah, and we know that, things in this profession are changing quickly. So, by the time I took cataloging, I learned about, Mark. Well, they've already moved on to RDA. It was we learned all of these things, and then at the end of the semester, they're like, and we're about to change all of it to this thing, which we didn't teach you. But do I at least understand the basic principles of how we index, organize, and assign meaning to information? Yes. And actually, even though I knew that I definitely didn't really want to be a cataloger at all, that background information informed my work as an instruction librarian. So that is also kind of why it bums me out to hear students who just can't make the ties between learning different aspects of this profession because they don't want to teach or they don't want to be a cataloger. We're all in this together. If you can understand what your colleague is doing in tech services, then that helps you communicate with that person a little bit more. Yeah, I don't know. It's just something that I think is important. So again, so much of what you'll end up doing in your jobs, like school just really cannot prepare you for 100%. You can only at best ask to, or hope that you develop some baseline skills and understanding, get enough experience to get your foot in the door. But yeah, really it's going to be what you do on the job that's going to challenge you in the best way possible. So be open to that. Yeah, and also just keep in mind what guides your own approach to this profession. So next slide. Is just to think big. So this is my tidbit of like advice. Think about what your vision is for your future and what your career is now, like where you're at now. So I actually only recently was posed this question about vision, like, what is your vision? And I actually don't have an answer. I know that intuitively, and as I've reflected and prepared for this talk, that there is something that guides me to do what I want to do and why I'm drawn to this profession. As I reflect on, working with Hack Library School and what I'm doing now, I've been having a hard time trying to articulate what the connection is. And the other tricky thing about crafting like a vision for yourself is that you also have to be okay with knowing that you'll never fully achieve your vision. Like if you think too small, I'll take myself for example, like when I was in library school, like get a job. Well, what happens when you get that job? That's like kind of what I'm struggling with, was that I have always been such a goal-oriented person. I just think very linear, like, okay, get job. Okay, I have the job, now what? Like what am I aspiring to next? Like what do I really want to do? Do I just want to like show up and like, clock in and clock out, or do I want to try to push the envelope? Do I want to try to do more? I think a lot of us who have read this blog, who have written for it, been involved with it, I think we are passionate people. We actually, I'm trying not to cuss, we actually care about, the future of this profession, right? So it's more than just like getting this job. It's like, what else can you put out there? Yeah, because what happens once you like achieve that like goal or that vision? So the thing about vision is that it's like the horizon that you can see in the future, like out there, but as you walk towards it, it just keeps moving. So you'll never get there. But that, in a way, is to challenge you guys to think really big. Like, what is it? And what is it that's like in that horizon for you? And even if you see it, you kind of see it, it's like hazy or foggy, like for me personally. I do know that whatever it is, it also guides the like path of how I approach it, right? So I mentioned earlier that I was really, before I got to library school, I was really interested in social justice, and I didn't always see the ties between how I could incorporate that interest into librarianship. Like, I mean, we're like learning about collection development policies and like cataloging. At the time in school, like nobody prompted me to say like, hey, have you ever thought about how we index these things and think about these problematic subject terms? Nobody said that. I mean, it's only now that I like look back and it's like, oh man, if I had like known just to like push the envelope a little bit more, then maybe I could have better challenged my like education. I mean, at the time I felt frustrated in school, but now that I know a little bit more of what I didn't know, I kind of am like, oh man, there was so much potential for me to like learn so much more. But that's the thing about this profession. It's like even if you graduate from school, you can continue to learn. But anyway, before I like totally get off subject here, I just think it's easy to get bogged down in the everyday. So this is like me also reflecting, having worked in libraries for a couple of years and now starting to get into middle management, which is its own beast. Seriously, I think that we need like if anybody has ever worked in middle management, like we should have like our own little like support club, because it's different than just being like the big boss. You're like answering to all these different stakeholders. Yeah, so it gets really easy to get bogged down in the everyday. But if you can remember to keep your ideas about your vision and what guides you, what it makes you passionate, like just don't forget to lift your head up and look forward every now and again. So that's something that I do to remind myself about that. Yeah, and I'll leave you guys with these final questions just to consider. So find what that spark is for you. What is on your horizon? What makes you want to wake up and work in this profession? And what do you want to work towards?
Hey everyone, I'm Brianna. It's really hard to think about like following up all that amazing wisdom that Annie and Micah just shared, but I will do my best. So I wanted to talk about how I got interested in librarianship, and it's because of Google, actually. So I was an undergraduate, and it was my very first semester, and I said, you know, I really want to be an English major, but I need some justification. What am I going to do with my English degree? So I Googled careers for English majors, and they said librarian. And I said, maybe I can do that. And so I actually like came in through this really sort of like traditional portal. And fast forward a few years later, I decided to go to graduate school at Indiana University. Next slide. So Annie talked about being driven by fear, and I was totally, always constantly driven by fear as well. I was nervous about a few things. So I actually graduated from undergrad when I was 20, and I turned 21 about a month before I started graduate school. And I kept sort of hearing like, oh, well, people don't take, you know, new grads who go straight to graduate school. They don't really take them seriously. So I was scared about that. And I was really interested in working with library technology in some form, and I didn't really have that background. I was an English major, and I was scared about that. I had never been paid to work in a library, so I had volunteered, and I had kind of schemed and tried to get whatever pieces of experience that I could, but I had never actually been paid, so I was just volunteering. And I was a woman interested in technology, and I didn't know if that would fly, and I didn't know what the climate was like, and I was just really nervous about fitting in. Next slide. So this blog that I created when I was like just about to head to library school kind of reflects that. So I titled it Not So Stern Librarian, and if anybody follows me on Twitter, like that's the origin of my Twitter handle. I wanted to be fun, and I wanted to have fun, and I still wanted to fit into the profession. And I think that this is like that reflection. And I was so uncertain about what the field would hold for me, because I saw a lot of sort of like spaces and services that, to me, as like a current student, I just didn't know. I didn't feel necessarily the connection with what was happening. And so I was like, well, maybe if I join in, like maybe it will change. But I still had so much uncertainty even when I was about to start library school. Next slide. And then I got to IU, and I don't know, I didn't necessarily feel right away the same sort of drive and energy that I felt like I was bringing. Like I was ready to dive in. I had gotten such exceptional advice from a mentor who was actually a recent graduate of Indiana University, who came to work at my undergraduate library. And she said, just dive in, work as much as you can, meet people, try things out. She gave me such good advice. And then I got to library school, and I just didn't feel that energy from my peers. And I felt like this super intense person because I was taking it so seriously, and I wanted to try stuff. Next slide. So I feel like I really lucked out when I found the Hack Library School community. So I had sort of read Hack Library School off and on, but I didn't have like an RSS feed or anything like that. So very randomly, I think it was like December of 2011, I went to the blog and I saw that you guys were looking for writers, and it was like due that day or the next day or something. So I like super lucked out on that. And I quickly pulled together a little application and I linked out to my blog that I was writing stuff on. And it was just really, really exciting because they accepted me, which was awesome. And this was the first post that I wrote. So I wrote this Hack Your Program post about Indiana. And I reread it, of course, as I was preparing for this talk, and I think it's quite fair. So I list the pros and I list the cons of the program, and I would still totally stand by the things that I wrote in it. But I remember it felt so daring. It felt so daring to write this and to have a platform to write critically about a program that you're in, which is crazy because it's fair and that's what we should be doing. But there's something about it that just feels so sort of dangerous. Like, should I be admitting that I have these issues with my program? Next slide. So I continued to write for Hack Library School, and a lot of what I wrote about was sort of like the emotions and like the strategies that I employed while I was a student to like get through everything. I was always very vocal about my feelings that we need to get experience. We need to get experience in whatever ways we can. It's not always easy to get experience, but how can we scheme and plot and make it happen? And so those are the things that I found that I tended to write about a lot, and so much that I still write about that stuff on my own blog, so I feel like I'm just kind of a broken record at this point. But it was really great because Annie had asked me to be a managing editor when she graduated and stepped away. And so along with Topher, we sort of started doing that side of the work as well. Next slide. To switch gears a little bit, I kind of wanted to challenge even the title of our talk today. So Micah did come up with this title. And when we were talking about it, I was like, I don't know if I agree with that at all. So I want to kind of explore that, and we'll see what you guys think about that. Next slide. So we have these professional organizations out there, and these are just a few of them sort of randomly selected. And they're sort of inscrutable, right? Like particularly as students, but even as a new professional, I don't quite know what to make of them. They're hierarchical, and they're sort of distributed, and there's like red tape, and you don't really know, like, are these impactful, or do these just sort of like exist out there? At least that's been something that I've been trying to infiltrate and understand how to sort of get value from them. Next slide. And then we have, I see that ALA Think Tank, my graphic did not show up. So then we have sort of these grassroots communities that start because people are passionate and they want to talk about things and they come together. And I'm really delighted that, Hack Library School is one of those. I get a lot of energy from these groups, and I find them really inspiring, and I try to engage with them when I can. Next slide. So it wasn't until I became an editor for Hack Library School that I started to sort of recognize how much work went into the behind-the-scenes organization, even just sort of being a cheerleader to like encourage people to write and to make people feel excited about writing, and I feel like with these communities, like there's so much invisible work that goes into making something beautiful or useful or inspiring out of something totally ordinary. Next slide. Okay, so I'm incredibly inspired by the fact that this happened, that this symposium happened. It's amazing and it's astonishing, and it didn't have to happen. And it's because of a group of passionate people that this happened. So I just get really, really frustrated when I feel like people aren't coming forward. I would hate to see this symposium happen, and I hope that the organizers feel like they've had enough support from the community, but I would hate to see something like this happen and go away because people say that, oh, nobody showed up. So I'm a little irked. I'm irked by the fact that, so my current institution, University of Wisconsin, that there's nobody here from UW We're 3.5 hours away. I'm sorry. And I know that they saw it because I put it on their newsletter thing. And also Indiana. I graduated from Indiana. We have a huge program. And it's so close. And people aren't here. And I don't think people are here virtually. I mean, I'm looking at Ryan right now. Ryan's here and Kyle's here. Those are people that I'm tweeting to in this screenshot here. But I think it's really disturbing. And I don't know. I get really riled up about it. Next slide. Yeah, it's a little sad. So this is like a very emo picture. And honestly, I picked it because I want that shirt. But it's like, it leads us down this path of despair, and that's sad and avoidable. Next slide. So I have my own story of being a little sad and losing some energy. And I kind of struggled with whether I should talk about this, since this is a panel about Hack Library School, or at least we're brought together through Hack Library School. But I do think that it's kind of a little story that is worth mentioning. So I think we all feel really strongly, the folks who have worked with Hack Library School, we all feel very strongly that the leadership needs to remain with current students. We don't need to linger on, but I kind of did linger on the Google group that we're part of. And I became really interested this fall when I was working in my role in, we have this sort of amazing community of people who have graduated, so to speak, from Hack Library School, people who have written for Hack Library School. It's a growing community. I don't know how many people it would be at this point, but we're all doing sort of different things, cool things, and it's hard to even keep up with those individuals. So I was thinking, wouldn't it be cool if we could come up with some way to make sure that we're staying in touch, sharing ideas, doing cool stuff, working together, whatever. And then I also have sort of this bigger idea. I don't necessarily think that professional organizations or library schools are good at creating mentorship opportunities for current students. I think it's a huge gap that exists. And admittedly, it's a really hard problem to tackle. It's not something that's easy. But I see Hack Library School as being a community that could step in some way and maybe come up with some ideas. So I kind of had these two sort of related ideas that I was wondering, is anybody interested in this? So I don't know, at one point I wrote up this email to the group and I said, guys, do you guys think this is interesting? Is this worthwhile? I'm interested in this. What do you think? And a bunch of people came back and said, yeah, we're really interested. Let's talk about this. Let's explore this issue. It was awesome. So I said, okay, well, let me set up a meeting and we'll talk about this. So created a doodle poll. Everybody filled out their availability, created this agenda. The day of, sent out that reminder, hey guys, see you tonight. I think it was 9 p.m. my time. And set everything up, sent out the link, and nobody showed up. Nobody showed up. So I was like, okay. And it's annoying, but it's not you're not aggravated about it because it's things come up. Things come up for me. So it's not you're angry, but it's oh, okay. So I didn't go out with my friend tonight because I was setting up this Google Hangout and I'm sitting here at 9 p.m. and I'm really tired and I was thinking about how I would structure this meeting and now nobody is here. So it's just okay. So I just sent this little email and I tried not to be angry about it, but I also just tried to say this happened. The sadder part of the story is that then I said, should we still talk about this? And people said, yeah, let's talk about it. I did it again. I sent the doodle poll again. I sent out the agenda again. I sent out that reminder email again. One person showed up, Michael Rodriguez. I know that you're tuning in, so hello, Michael. So we had a really great chat, but we didn't talk about this. People emailed me and said hey, I'm so sorry this came up, and that's cool, and that happens. It totally happens. But I gave up on this. I felt sort of foolish that I had taken this energy that I could be putting toward many other things in my life that I care about. And I thought, okay, if Hack Library School doesn't care about this issue, nobody cares about this issue. And whatever, I can do other things with my time. Next slide. So I think like putting ourselves out there in this way and not being met, this is sort of what leads, at least what leads me to feel like this sort of burnout of like you put this energy forward and you care so much and you want to do stuff, but you have to have that community. Next slide. So I've always, at least when I was in library school, I kind of gave this idea, this term, leadership the side eye, right? Like I saw a lot of administrators who were leaders, and I said, I don't know if that's leadership so much, like you're just an administrator. That's not like a blanket statement about all administrators, but I just kind of was skeptical of this term and of this concept, and I didn't know what it would quite mean for me. Next slide. But I've kind of recognized that like there is no roadmap, right, for any of these things that we want to do. It's just sort of exploratory, like nobody knows what they're doing. Nobody knows what to do, and you know, you just have to sort of try things. Next slide. I've decided that I am doing my job well if I am asking pointed questions, if I am pushing. Next slide. If I'm giving people something to react to. Something that I have found as a new professional is very much that everything is super complicated and it's hard to understand sort of what's going on and what to do with this information. It's not even like you have two paths in front of you. It's like you have every path in front of you and what do you want to do with it? And that is so paralyzing. Like I think that that's the reason for a lot of sort of stagnation with services that we provide and things, because it's, you don't, culturally, like you don't necessarily want to fail. You don't want to have big failures. And it just sort of makes you stop and like do nothing. But I think it's much better and much more interesting if you can do something and then people can react and then you can have that conversation around that something that happened. I think that that is what I am trying to do, because in my current role, like it feels very hard to know how to move forward. It feels that way all the time, but I really try to do things and again, give people something to react to. Next slide. So I think that one of the things that was really important for me to touch on today is just that library students can create change and do create change, but I also think that new graduates and young professionals have sort of a responsibility and an obligation to make sure that we're looking out for the best interests of students. You know, it can be kind of discombobulating because you go from being a student and that's your whole world. And like kind of what Annie was talking about, like you just want to get that job, like, you know, that's what you're being driven toward. Then you get that job and sort of suddenly you feel you have this whole new suite of concerns in front of you. And so it's kind of like you feel so detached almost instantly from your library student life because you have this whole new world that you're dealing with. And so I also know that for myself, like it was really challenging because I didn't want to speak for students anymore. Like, oh, I'm not a student. I can't speak for students. You know, you don't want to like encroach. That's kind of how I felt almost instantly, even just that summer after I had just graduated. A little story. So I am on the planning committee for the Research Data Access and Preservation Summit, which will be in like 2 weeks, and I'm very excited for it. And I had invited my student assistant, Elliot, at the beginning of the year. I said, hey, maybe you want to be on this planning committee. This could be a really great opportunity for you, because he's interested in sort of data librarianship in this area. And so he participated in the planning committee, and he ended up signing up to moderate a panel. And then it came around to the time where we were talking about registration. And there was no student registration rate. and he did not qualify for the panelist rate because he was just a moderator. And I got really upset. And I felt really bad. I felt like implicated because I had invited him to be part of this. And I remember just like sitting there and being like, this is so uncool. And I was like, I'm on this committee. I can do something about it. So I sent out this email. And it's funny because like, I remember feeling like so irritated, and it was like this light bulb moment of like saying like, I have a voice and I'm on this freaking committee and I can actually send an email that conveys how I feel about this. So I think it's just like funny how we forget that we can talk about those things. And somebody else weighed in and also said like, yes, let's do the student registration rate thing. And so then, I mean, it's still expensive, but it's something, and it sets a precedent, you know, and for me, it's very important, you know, to get students involved in this and to send that message that like, you are welcome here, we want you here. Next slide. What's really cool is that there are a lot of us. So if we're all thinking this way, and if we're all thinking about small changes that we can make when, you know, either as a student or when you get a job, because you'll be surprised, like, when you get a job, like how quickly you become part of sort of those mysterious conversations that you're always not necessarily connected to. You know, you become part of these places where you can make decisions that impact students. So I think that it's important to remember that we can all do sort of these little things. Next slide. One thing that has really helped me is talking about failures and talking about rejections. This has been sort of soothing because, you know, when I was a library student, I didn't know what I was doing, and that's continued till present day and will continue on moving forward as well. But there's so much rejection that we all have to go through if we want to do anything or get anything done, and like we don't talk about that. So I feel like every time we do get rejected, we feel like so bad and like we're just such losers. I felt like a loser all the time, you know, and so I think that one of the best things that we can do is we can just share our rejections, not necessarily in a blog post like mine, but just talking to each other about it and not having to hide that. Next slide. Okay, I feel bad for this butterfly. You're not gonna like what I have to say about what has to happen to this butterfly. So, I read a really good essay recently by the writer Ann Patchett, and it's called The Getaway Car, and it's about her journey to becoming a writer. And one of the things that she talks about is she talks about how you have these sort of ideas in your imagination, and when you put them onto the page, they're so much uglier and worse than what existed in your imagination. And so she likens this to having a beautiful butterfly and then crushing it. We need to crush the butterfly. We need to be okay with outputs that are not perfect. We need to just try things and do things. Next slide. And support each other in doing these things. Because like I mentioned earlier, it can be hard to move forward in a complex environment and just to do things. And it can like drain your energy. And when things don't work out, it can be really hard and it can be sad and it can be lonely. So encouraging each other to do these things, whatever they might be, I think is really critical. Next slide. And the point that I want to end on is just kindness in this broader community is one of like the most important things that we can do for each other, because we so rarely know what's going on in each other's personal lives or whatever, and it's just, library school is so hard, becoming a new professional, all of the transitions that happen, you know, it's so hard. It can be so emotionally hard, and we just, in whatever small ways that we can, you know, being able to support each other is just critical, and to be kind, and to bring the positivity, you know, and if you see somebody who is a new student or who looks lonely, to go up to them and to say hi and to make introductions. I mean, it's just thinking of kindness as this backbone to all of the things that we do and all of the communities that we try to create, I think is just, it's so critical. And I've benefited so much from the kindness of so many people. And I just hope that we can all continue to sort of share that. And that's all. Thank you. Okay, so does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask any three of our panelists? Okay, I'm coming back. So this is Alice Mitchell back here.
Hi, yeah, and I'm a second year GISLIS student here. And I'm one of the freaks who's known that library school is always the right place for me. Like, it's been what I've been working towards my entire life, essentially, which is weird. But my question is, in your work, how important do you think professional ethics are? Because I think our professional ethics are something very unique to our profession and something that set us apart as librarians. I'm not sure about professional ethics for information science people. So I wanted to hear about what your thoughts would be on professional ethics.
It's on. Okay, sorry. Yeah, you know what? I think you're right. Like, that is kind of what we learn when we're in graduate school is kind of like, yeah, our own professional code of ethics. So when you are working, let's say, at the circulation desk and somebody comes up and asks you for the record of their kids' books, it's like, do you just, I mean, first of all, we probably don't even have that, right? Because we have a code of ethics and a respect for, like, patron privacy and intellectual, I mean, we have so many different principles that are, like, essential to the core of what we do, no matter what you end up, like, what kind of librarian you end up being, like, that still shapes who we are and makes us unique as librarians. So, I mean, I think it's awesome. But I don't know if that answers your question.
Can I chime in?
Go for it.
Yeah, so I think that's what I meant when I was talking about principles, that the idea of professional ethics. That, yeah, it's strange coming into a field like librarianship because I think most jobs don't have that they don't have this sense of the right thing to do or the good thing to do or the thing that we're expected to do. And I think that's really important, and engaging with that is really important. That's what I was talking about when I kept saying these principles that we all rely on or that we can all rally around. But something that you should know is that it's more difficult to do that when you're in the job. It's just like the humdrum of 100 emails a day and middle management, like Andy mentioned. I'm just getting into some of that too, and it's just ridiculous and complicated and political. And I'm sure some of you have seen some of those blogs from public librarians, kind of talking about patrons or this dummy did this, and like it gets more complicated to remember principles and ethics when you're stuck in the middle of the work. But that doesn't make it any less important. So approaching the job the way you do, I forgot the name of Alice, approaching the job the way that you are, I think is really going to be important for the future of the field and for us to make that change happen by exhibiting that or by being those examples. So it's important.
Yeah, I would say that it's not like I wake up every morning thinking like, oh, I must protect like intellectual freedom, but it's like tucked in the back of my mind, right? It's because it's a part of all of our training, no matter what library school you go to. So it's sort of like when certain issues arise, then I'm like, oh, okay, so what is it that I really learned? I actually will give you a real life example something that happened last week, which is a first for me. I had to file my very first police report against a patron. And honestly, I had to do it because this person was like relentlessly calling. Like, so on our phones, we can show like up to 100 missed calls. This person has been calling and harassing all of the service points in my library. It's a pretty big library. So after like a month of this, at least a month of this person like continually harassing like all of the people who work at these different service desks, is like, okay, we have to do something. Like as a manager, I manage our information commons. It's like I have to like, this is costing us too much time, and time is money. And the administrators are like, okay, what are we going to do about this person? But ethically, I feel like, you know, I felt really kind of bad. Like, yeah, this person was kind of a pain, and but I also like think like, you know, taking a step back, it's like, well, this person actually really needs help, right? Like in the city of Chicago, there just aren't that many places. Like the mayor has shut down so many of like the mental like health facilities. Where are these people supposed to go? But then I struggle because it's not like the library, specifically an academic library. I mean, not to knock public libraries. Like, it's not like the library is going to be able to provide her with the help that she needs. But I feel like, kind of in a way, like what kind of a space are we supposed to provide for all of our patrons, right? Like the door is supposed to be open for anyone to like satisfy their intellectual like curiosity. So yeah, sometimes I find myself like in conflict with that, but then I have to also remind myself like, well, I don't know if this is quite the place, but I still have empathy for this person that I had to file a police report against. It's like, I don't really want to do this, and I wouldn't really want my actions to like cause this person to end up in jail, because that's the last place that I think that they need to be. It like really is like something I've been grappling with, and I have like a lot of guilt about it, but it's like at the same time you also have to answer to like your stakeholders, and also try to make sure like we have a space that we need to run efficiently, and the time that the staff has been using to like deal with this problem patron also is time that's being taken away from the people who we're really supposed to be helping, which is our campus community. I don't know. It's hard. And sometimes you'll find that you'll probably be faced with these similar situations. And it's like you have to take actions that you don't feel 100% great about. But at least I have enough to know, I don't know. At least I feel conflicted, I feel. Like it's good to have empathy, right? Like kindness. It's good to keep that in mind.
Okay, so one of our virtual participants, Martin, has a question. Would you like to go ahead and press talk so we can hear you?
I think you can hear me now. Is it okay, the audio?
Yes, you're good. We can hear you loud and clear. Yes.
Okay. So I just would like to make a short comment that it's really good that you mentioned the common points of different kind of library profession that we related to the library and information science education field, that we have a kind of common core, but otherwise it's an extremely difficult situation for the new professionals when you want to find a job that you have to decide yourself that what is your real interest, what kind of experience you need in the desired field, and these kind of challenges appear really well in this presentation.
Sorry, I had a hard time. I heard you asking about what experiences you need, but it was kind of hard to hear.
Okay. So I just wanted to mention that I really liked on the presentation that the real complexity of the
you. Yeah, I mean, actually, just between the three of us, like, we have, like, Brianna, Micah, and I have very different job roles. I mean, we're all academic librarians, but under that umbrella, we totally face different issues, probably different guiding principles in some ways, you know, and our job duties are totally, like, different. I mean, there is maybe some overlap, but also a lot of other, we all put out different fires. This is actually a follow-up comment to something that Brianna mentioned about community. And it's something that and actually kind of echoing something that Micah said too, he said that he quit ALA after 1 year because he quote-unquote wasn't getting anything out of it. Actually, out of curiosity, how many of you are ALA members? Most of you? Not? Okay, yeah. I kind of felt like I was supposed to do ALA stuff when I was in library school. I was like, oh yeah, gotta be gung-ho about all of this stuff. And right now, I pretty much am at max capacity in terms of committees and involvement. So all the stuff that you say yes to when you're a student, like, oh man, just be careful. Just be careful. But I'm actually starting to feel more and more that the things that I find really rewarding are not ALA committees. It's actually these grassroots community projects like Hack Library School, Librarian Wardrobe, the CritLib community, you know, all of these other communities. I just feel like in some ways they feel more organic, and the mission and the goals behind the community just for some reason, I don't know, it doesn't feel like it's out some abstract thing and you're doing busy work and having to send out doodle polls and have nobody show up, because those groups are like self-selected and those people are already going to show up because they care. Yeah.
But it is kind of interesting, I think. It's kind of like the bystander effect. Like, if I'm remembering correctly, like, everybody always thinks that somebody else is going to do something about it. So you think, oh, they'll show up and it'll be fine. They'll get it taken care of, you know, but then what happens when we all collectively are too busy?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Mix. I'm a current GISLIS student. There seems to be, at least at GISLIS, sort of this big division between LS and the IS side of specializations. And I'm curious about ways we can better facilitate sort of this intermingling and mutual respect between the students on, and some might say seemingly disparate specializations, but I don't see them all as that different. And I'm just wondering ways we can get everyone to work together more.
Can you say the acronym? Sorry.
So LS should be library science and IS should be information science.
Information science. Haha. You know what? I think you should. You should totally take this one because you have a. Yeah, Indiana's so weird. Because you know, most programs is like LIS. It's like I have a master's of library science. There's no information in there, and you have.
Yeah, so the reason that I went to Indiana was actually because I was very attracted to their dual degree program. So they offer a library science degree and an information science degree, and you can kind of combo them and do them in less time if you do them together. And I was very interested in that, so that's like the main reason that I went to IU. It's a really good question, and I don't know sort of culturally like what it's like here. At Indiana, you know, we all kind of had to mingle, but that was mostly the people who were doing the dual degree that would mingle. Like, the people who were just doing information science would do their own things, and the people that were just doing library science would do their own things. So even though we were in the same department, then it became even more complicated because we got sucked into the School of Informatics and Computing, and nobody, well, so I was like one of the first like graduates of that, and I actually think it's a positive step, but it just needs to be like marketed, and students actually need to be told what it means for them, and it needs to be conveyed, and it needs to be very sort of transparent as to like what will this mean for you. So I think that community building has to be better. I don't know. I guess I don't have any any insight. I think that whenever you can bring people together socially, it's a really good thing. I'm like a huge believer in mixers and drinks and things like that, because when you can get people to like each other and to have fun together, suddenly they're going to start to recognize those connections between the work that they do on a day-to-day basis. You have to, I think it's just so important to have those social ties and to like each other.
Yeah, but I guess like it's hard if you put those things together and no one shows up. I mean, that's something that Brianna has mentioned quite. And actually, I had a flashback. I think talking to some of the organizers last night who talked about. I mean, I think that this is an amazing symposium in the marketing, the website. There's so much like hard work, and I really, really think it's awesome. When I was in library school, I worked with some of the librarians at the library where the library school was housed in, and we had a research conference that was for free. And we had like, I don't know, maybe 90, like 70 people like register, and like 20 people showed up. And like we got like speakers like from out of state to come and talk about their research, and it was for, I mean, it's like in your library school, like why would you not go? It's free. There's also free food. Like isn't that like enough to like it like incentivize you to show up? But I don't know. It's that I think that is really hard. Like when you're in library school, you're kind of like forced to like be in these classes with people, right? Like it's not like it's you can't always choose the community that you're like surrounded with. But then when you get out and you know you find these other grassroots sort of communities. I mean, which you can also do in school too. I don't know. Sometimes I found that talking to people who I didn't go to school with, like that was much more inspiring for me personally, because I wasn't really finding the community that I wanted at my program. So, I mean, that's a good question. Not that I have an answer. And I totally think that people from these two different sides should talk a lot more, because when you get into like, you know, you start working in a library and then you sometimes get, it's like weird politics between like library IT versus like everyone else or vice versa. It's like people don't understand each other, but don't we all have like some sort of guiding principle that like guides our work? Sometimes it doesn't feel that way. I don't know. I definitely think fostering communication between these two groups is like a good thing. I don't have an answer as to how.
I have an answer.
Great. Let's hear it.
No, I don't really have an answer, but I want to say something. I think that it's a great question, and I think because of the structure of LIS programs or iSchools or whatever we're calling it, informatics programs, because of the structure of those programs right now, we're being forced to think about these kind of things, like how do we talk to information science people, and what does it mean when a social media class is being taught for library school students by an informatics person, and where does information architect, you know, we're being forced to consider all those questions. But I wonder if, and like from my personal experience in the job, you don't need to know how to communicate with those people, because we are, well, okay, let me rephrase that. We all play different roles in an organization, right? So the best example of this that I can give you is this guy named Brian Brown, who went to school with Brianna. He's great. Just started working in the FSU library. He's a developer. He did that MLIS, that dual degree also. So he kind of knows how to speak our language, librarian. But the best thing that working with Brian has produced is me knowing that I don't need to know anything about programming. I don't need to know anything about what it means to develop a Drupal interface for an Islandora repository in Fedora, blah, blah, blah. Because that's Brian's job, and he's great at it, and there's no reason that I would ever need to know that stuff as long as I can work with great people like Brian. So the question, how do we communicate better between information science students and library science students in a classroom? We're just going to have to figure that out. But know that on the job, when you leave that 2-year program, you're going to be playing very different roles, and that's okay. And being able to communicate with one another is good, but you don't need to know how to be an information science person if you went into this to be a librarian. That's, I think, something that we'll have to push back on our curriculum in the way that they're to put communication and information and library science all together in one college. So that's my experience from the job. But I hope it helps.
Hi, I'm Karen Hodgen-Jones. I'm a graduate student in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning, and I just want to say I'm also pursuing a professional degree in another field, and all of the things you're saying about the divisions between groups and all of the things you're saying about how it actually manifests in the workplace, identical. It's not the case that this is located only in libraries or library and information science programs, or at least my experience doesn't tell me that it is. So, related to that, my question is, Annie, you said early on in your talk about kind of wanting to demonstrate the need for theoretical knowledge and that a strong base in theory is an important part of the curriculum. Do you find that within the LIS or LS programs that you've been in, that certain emphases or interest groups actually lend themselves to having a higher amount of theoretical engagement in the curriculum versus others? For example, I feel like some of the community programs, there are, say, 4 emphases within urban planning, and one is community development and social justice. This lends itself very much to engaging with theory, whereas transportation, maybe not so much, or not always. There certainly is some there, but it's not the case that the scholarship in that particular emphasis within the field is primarily concerned with theoretical underpinnings of transportation. It's mostly concerned with actually getting people places. And so between that question of practical and theoretical, like, do you see that there are things that kind of encourage these curricular divides?
Yeah, I think that is actually probably really true. Or, and I'm also biased because perhaps there is transportation theory, but I just don't know about it. Or there's like theory behind cataloging that I kind of might know that there might be something there, but I don't know specifically. I mean, for me, I think I understand what you're saying. Like, I work with people. I don't really work with books. I'm an instruction librarian. I teach. That lends itself to learning more, trying to learn more about different, like, learning theories. If I'm trying to incorporate social justice and, like, critical pedagogy, like, that, that's kind of more connected to theory also, and having an interest in trying to learn more about it. So I think I agree with you that there might be, but I don't know. I actually would love, to pose this question to everyone else too. Like, if you're not, let's say, an instruction librarian where you need to learn about learning theories, let's say you are coming in from like an information or computer science background, like, are there certain theoretical models or principles that are important? Because I didn't take those classes, so I don't know. Anybody? Yeah.
So I'll be brief, especially since I'm officially eating into break time right now, which is like my thing, I think. So I think there's a lot of implications of how technologies are developed and the way that they sort of shape how users can access information, right? And there's a lot of great scholarship, maybe not in LIS, but that has like space in LIS, like in science and technology studies and sort of various like critical digital studies, and in LIS also as sort of bridging those gaps. And I think oftentimes those spaces are most neglected because they seem to be like purely technical in some way when they're actually also very, very much social. And there's a lot of sort of like work on like social technical infrastructures that I think we should be talking about when we're talking about information science.
Yeah, that's actually a really, really great point. Yeah, I think we often tend to like isolate technology from the human values that are associated with it. At ACRL, Sophia Noble presented, she had an invited paper and she basically blew my mind. Like, if you want an ammo in terms of like, where do you want to be a librarian? We just have Google. It's like, whoa, try just Googling librarian and seeing what pops up. It's really, really fascinating that, it's not like we as humans design these tools, right? So there's like all these like structural limitations in terms of like race and gender, that things that I don't necessarily think of. I'm like, okay, iPad, cool. Like, I don't necessarily think about like the social structures that might have gone into like the design of that. And I think that's actually a really good point that I didn't even think of. But yeah, exactly. Announcements? Oh, questions?
Yeah, we still have till 11, so anyone can.
So, my name is Caitlin Archer-Helke. I'm a presenter later on, and I'm not really tech, although I do a lot of database troubleshooting. But I have a strong background, like Sveta, in critical theory because I have a master's in literature. Yeah, and so I would say myself that a critical theory background is really important to understanding the structures of what we do, the power structures, the social structures that set up and inform our delivery of information, and also the people who feel safe coming to us for information. So I really wish that critical theory were a part of every class. I mean, I am a person who literally carries around a huge book of post-colonial theory, so I'm biased, but I think it's really important because it does help us understand better.
And so and I'm just like following up. So you feel like your background in critical theory actually informs the work that you do as a technologist?
I think it informs everything that I do, to be honest.
Yeah.
So it informs, we do a lot of chat reference here, for instance, and it informs my chat reference, it informs my work on desk, because I at least am thinking about power structures and about the dynamics that are presumably in play. And it certainly informs my approach to my coursework and to the curricula.
I'd also, I have a sort of critical theory heavy background, and I'd say that if part of what we do with information as librarians or information scientists is help patrons and other people navigate multiple domains, one of the main things critical theory helps us do is be cognizant of what those domains are doing, like why they're separate, why they're together, what might be able to port from one to another and what might not. So I think not everybody needs to carry around like the big book at all times. I mean, I might be doing the same thing, but that's not like what I wouldn't necessarily advocate for all of us needing to do that, but I think if part of what we need to do is to prepare ourselves in school for lifelong learning, part of what we need to do is prepare ourselves and give ourselves the vocabulary to start doing reflective praxis at the moment. So
I hope somebody tweeted that, because that was, yeah.
As we're kind of nearing our break time, I just first of all, I want to thank you for saying that you liked our website, because on behalf of the planning committee, thank you. That makes me really happy. I wanted to explore the concept of showing up a little bit more, because you both touched on that. I think that for a lot of people, and we've discussed this a little bit yesterday and this morning, they might think that they can't make an impact or a difference. And clearly you don't think that, and probably nobody in this room thinks that because you're here. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how, in your transition from grad school to the professional world, you've found that you can make an impact, and what the areas are that you feel like you've been able to have the greatest impact in.
I think for me, it took me a while to really transition between seeing myself as somebody that could have impact versus me looking up to other people. So this is something that I would ask everyone to think about, and I hope that everyone has an answer to this. Like, think about one librarian or one professional that you look up to in this field, and why is it that you look up to them? I think for me, and maybe for a few of us, perhaps it's because they actually do show up, and they do things, and they get stuff done, and they put themselves out there, and good things happen, right? So I think it just took me a long time to realize that perhaps I could actually do that too. I was always like, oh, I'm just this lowly, like, I just like, I'm a librarian, like, oh, I just like, I'm down here and like this person's like way up here. And it turns out that people are really nice. And if you just talk to them, or if you join Web 2.0 platforms like Twitter and LinkedIn, the people are really accessible. And actually, here, you know, there's some really fantastic librarians that I look up to, like from a distance. I'm like, hello, Harriet Green, you're super cool. You're like the coolest librarian I ever know, and I'll just like wave to you from a distance and like, I'm glad she's not here because I would totally be embarrassed. Yeah, and I think it just takes kind of just being out of school and kind of developing your own confidence too to realize that I'm like, whoa, what is it that I want to do, right? Like I'm looking up to these people, like now I can actually do that too. But I would say that you guys, first of all, for showing up and actually creating this community, like right here in this room and online, like that is definitely, I think, inspiring.
Yeah, a few words on like graduating and starting a job and creating change. So basically, I went back and forth, and still to some extent go back and forth between feeling like everything is possible and nothing is possible. Like this is like within minutes, within days, within, you know, months and weeks. I mean, you know, it's been like so up and down and like crazy. The transition has just been like absolutely insane. And one of the best things that somebody told me when I started the job that I have is just, it's complicated, it's harder than you expect, don't get burned out, give it time. I think that that's really important. That's just important life advice in general. But as far as like creating change, again, like I have felt so often that I don't have answers for people. I'm in sort of this weird, strange, undefined role, and I don't have answers, and I don't always have solutions for people. I can't give them exactly what they need from me, but I try to be an approachable person, and I try to bring positive energy, and I am kind of like thinking that that has to be enough when I don't have those answers. Of course, I'm trying to get those answers. I'm trying to ask the pointed questions again to get to a point where we have those answers, but I don't know. And this whole thing about showing up, like, for me it's kind of tricky because just because somebody's not showing up here doesn't mean they're not showing up to something else. So it's not, you know, it's hard to like to gauge that, and it's hard to judge people because there are plenty of things that I haven't shown up for. There are plenty of people that I'm like beholden to right now and things that I haven't done that I need to do. You know, so like it's like who are any of us to judge necessarily? So I always feel kind of weird about saying that, but I think it's just about like finding worthwhile things and really like finding the people that you want to work with to get stuff done and then doing it.
Yeah, and tapping into your passions, yeah, and your vision.
Yeah, and can I also add that I think that showing up is important, and you need to do that when it is important and for the important things that you believe in. But also, one thing I wanted to make sure I said today is that we all need to learn how to say no. That's something that I didn't do and haven't done well, and what it's led to is total burnout. Right now, as we were prepping for this session, the first email I sent to Annie and Brianna, I said, I don't know if I got anything positive to say because I'm not feeling the job right now. I'm not feeling like I'm part of this, you know, great library community that I say that I believe in. It feels sucky and stupid and boring, and emails are ridiculous, and et cetera, et cetera. But I think that's a product of my own excitement about being part of the profession, but not being able to say no. So I overextended myself really quickly, and what that has led to is me letting people down and not being able to show up. So show up for, you need to, like I think Leanne said, define your vision and passion, and focus on those things, and that will help you show up for the things that matter. And then you don't sign up for, you know, a million committees and start missing deadlines and letting people down. And that's the worst thing, is when people know that you believe in the work and that you're interested in the work, and you just have too much on your plate and you let people down. So I encourage you all to get into the first couple opportunities you have when you're on the job. Obviously say yes to the things that you need to, really, really consider what good they'll do you and what good you will be able to do for that group or committee or task force or whatever. So be in the practice of saying no. After this presentation, I have said no to a multitude of things over the last couple months because I can't take anything that's on right now. And I need to actually cut back. So that's something I'm learning in my professional practice is being able to say no.
Yeah, and I just want to follow up with that. Think about this. Every time you say yes to something, you're actually saying no to something else. I also learned this the hard way. And yeah, I feel exactly what Micah is feeling because I have said yes so much that I have completely overextended myself. And it affects your personal life too. I think it's really hard as librarians, we're such passionate people, to have like work-life balance, but there is supposed to be some life in there. Because if you're not like balanced, you're just no good to anybody at work, or at home. So yeah, while it is important to show up for the things that you don't have to say yes right away. You can take a couple of days to like think about whether you want to say yes to a commitment or not. And that's kind of why I'm rolling off of ALA committees because I have completely overextended myself. And I'm like, you know what, I would rather put my time into like a grassroots project like CritLib than a committee on, I don't know, standards for accreditation or something, which I'm not on that committee, I'm just saying. It doesn't seem as rewarding to me, personally.
So we probably have time for one more question if anyone wants to get one in. Or anybody, if anyone in the virtual attendee has a question. Okay. Wait.
Okay. So first of all, I just want to thank you guys for being here and for being so supportive, which is really awesome. And then I just kind of also want to, sorry. I also want to say sort of thank you for talking about like failure so much in your presentation. Because it can be really, really scary, especially when you're in the space where you're just like, I need to act like everything I've ever done is perfect so that somebody will like employ me and give me a paycheck. And I think that's also just like a really important way to build community, to sort of make ourselves approachable as not sort of like we're all perfect, we do everything right the first time, but sort of say like, let's try this together and maybe it'll work out. So thank you guys so much.